Want to dive right into it. The Mark and I were just talking just a minute ago, but I was listening to an earlier podcast today, and a topic came up about just the difference of college football coaches and NFL football coaches, and the personality difference that is needed for each industry, let's call it. But essentially, the topic came up that talked about dynasties, and one of the coaches that was mentioned was Barry Switzer was one of them that was mentioned, Nick Saban, and also Bo Schembechler. And it made me think about the topic of today, talking about that. Would you consider the time that Bo spent at Michigan, would you consider that a dynasty? And it was a very interesting topic, interesting thing. So, Dre, I know I'm dropping this on you right now, so I'll give you a minute, but want to kick it to Mark and get your thoughts. Like, would you consider Bo Schembechler's time at Michigan? Would you consider that a dynasty?
I will start out by saying that I believe that if we took a poll, that most people would consider it, if they were neutral fans, that they would consider needing to win whatever the championship is in the sport, the Super Bowl, the World Series, a national championship in college football, to have a dynasty. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that a couple things come into play. Of course, winning comes into play, and then also length of time, the duration. And for Bo Schembechler, he was at Michigan, 1969 through 89, I believe 21 seasons. I was going to look up his record, but he's one of those guys in Michigan football during that time. I bet I could practically recite his record year to year at Michigan. Ohio State and Michigan had a crazy back and forth when he first took over. So his first year at Michigan, 1969, they were a huge underdog to Ohio State. Ohio State was number one, consensus number one. They had won the national championship, Ohio State, the year before. Michigan's a 17-point underdog, and that's pretty much was Bo's arrival that they pulled off one of the great upsets in college football history, and he beat Ohio State his first year in 69 to go to the Rose Bowl. And then what ensued was the 10-year war, which was so special because you had Woody Hayes, Bo Schembechler. Schembechler was a disciple of Woody Hayes and coached under him and had so much respect for him. But then he goes to the rival Michigan. And the legend has it that even though they were close for their entire lives, they did not speak a word for 10 years, except for shaking hands at midfield, and just saying kind of good luck and turning around. And that's the way it was for 10 years. And there were seasons in which Michigan was, in a sense, the unluckiest football team in the country. There was a 4-year span where they lost to Ohio State by, 2 or 3 points, 3 of those 4 years. The other year was a tie in which the Big Ten voted and sent Ohio State to the Rose Bowl, went against its own rule and sent Ohio State to the Rose Bowl, even though Ohio State had gone to 3 consecutive Rose Bowls. So there was a 4-year run where Michigan didn't lose a game except for to Ohio State. Did not lose a football game. They went like 31-3 or whatever that adds up to over the course of 3 seasons into 4 seasons. And then the other game they didn't lose. They went like 10-1, and they just got shut out of the Rose Bowl, therefore shut out of a national championship opportunity. And of course, there was no playoff or BCS championship, and it was a vote. But I'll kick it to Dre because I could go on about this forever. I will state that Michigan football just lived in the top 10 during that time. And as Desmond let us know before we started to record, 13 Big Ten championships for Bo Schembechler in 20 years is ridiculous, especially with having a power like Ohio State in the league. Now, some of those were shared championships, so if you add them all up, it's going to come out to more than 20. But, yeah, I consider that a dynasty, and it was just a little different age of college football, and maybe in a sense more difficult to win national championships because Michigan would have played in a playoff probably half of those 21 seasons under Bo Schembechler.
Dre, what are your thoughts?
For one, can you hear me?
You're a little muffled.
How about now? Is that better?
Perfect.
There we go.
All right. So what I wanted to say is, for one, the word dynasty cannot be used too lightly. Because to me, a dynasty, for one, is consistency, it's dominance, and typically when you think about dynasties in the history of sports across the board, whether it's college level, college football, college baseball, basketball, NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA, NHL, etc., you typically don't have to think about too much. If someone says, "Is this team a dynasty?" Like if I was to say to you, in the '60s, was for Boston Celtics a dynasty? That'll be a consensus yes. 11 championships where Russell had. If I was to say that the Alabama Crimson Tide under Nick Saban is a dynasty, there's no one's going to say that they're not. You're talking about 10 plus years, almost, well, not 20, almost 20 years of consistent dominance, of multiple championships. So I think when you put in Bo Schembechler's era at Michigan, you try to connect that with the word dynasty. I don't think it checks any of those boxes. Yeah, maybe consistency in terms of win total per year, but is it memorable? Is it beyond reproach in terms of is it like you don't have to think about it? If you have to think about a team, if a team is a dynasty, then they're probably not a dynasty. That's the way I look at it.
Do you think that the recent success, and you mentioned Nick Saban, do you think the recent success of Nick Saban of not only having winning dominance in the SEC, but also winning multiple championships, do you think that has skewed your view of what a dynasty is, or do you think it's impacted your view of it that at all?
His recent success, like
well, just because of he's recent in relation to Bo Schembechler.
No, not necessarily. I mean, I think that you could put Nick Saban's run in any era, even the era that I didn't grow up watching, and I still look at it statistically. Like I didn't have to just experience it. And with Saban, I experienced it, watching it firsthand, and I also have the statistical data to back up that feeling, right, and back up that line of thinking. You can put Saban in another era, and even if I didn't grow up watching it, just looking at the statistics of it, I'm like, yeah, that's without a doubt a dynasty. Bear Bryant's era at Alabama, you could say probably is a dynasty, right? You think about Dan, Greg Popovich, era as the Spurs head coach, you say is dominant. He had a dynasty, under that, right? So I think it's just, do I have to think about it? Is it clear as day? Right. And I just don't think that Bo Schembechler, think about his Bo record, right? It's just not enough. It's too much questions and not enough clear-cut answers without debate for me to call that a dynasty. Not even close.
So what everything Dre just said, I think, is legitimate and valid. I don't think there's a clear-cut answer, but I think it's clear in his mind, and I all that makes sense to me. But then I would question Michigan's status as an elite football program. And I just don't mean now, I would mean all time, because Bo Schembechler is just as quickly as Dre, you're able to point out a dynasty and then discard other examples as non-dynasties. Michigan's greatest football coach of all time is Bo Schembechler. Nobody, that's without question as well. And I was searching for coaches that have not won national championships, and that's difficult to do in terms of, okay, who's a great football coach? Woody Hayes, Urban Meyer, Nick Saban, Bear Bryant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We could keep going. Oklahoma coaches, USC coaches. And I'm trying to find an equal to Bo Schembechler who did not win a national championship, and that's tough to do. So he is in a kind of different slot there. But all of those guys ran dynasties to my definition, and it sounds like the Dre's definition. But then if your greatest football coach of all time didn't have a dynasty, I don't know what that says about the success of the program overall.
Well, I think the brand of the program is based on longevity, not based on, and not based on, championships. Like I don't agree, Mark. I don't think you can have dynasty without championships being the center of it. because dynasty to me is not just good for a long time. Dynasty is that you are great for a long time. And within that time period, you were able to be great with different regimes coming and going, different adversaries coming and going, and with through it all, you still won, right? Think about Saban's era at Alabama. The programs that have risen and fallen during this dominance. He dealt with LSU in their prime. He's dealt with Florida. Well, not really. He kind of got started after Florida, but he's dealt with now he's dealing with Georgia. He's dealt with Clemson in their prime. They might come back, but we'll see. He's been able to withstand a Florida State, becoming pretty good for a couple of years. He's been able to withstand all of that and still continue to dominate this pretty much the last 20 years. So I just that's what I think about when I think of a dynasty, and I could take that to baseball. If I was think of a dynasty, I'll think of the Yankees in the early '90s. Going against the Braves. Beating the Mets. All these teams that were really good. In that era, and they won I think from '93 to '97, they won 3 or 4 World Series or something crazy like that. So I mean, it's rare that you use the word dynasty, and the reason why is because it's so hard to do, and it's because it's that special.